very much honored and grateful to be with all of you today. My special gratitude to Jim Dansenbook and to the Ford Asian Indian Association, to Don Wood, and to all of you for so kindly giving your precious time to be with us today. I was asked to speak on the subject of unity in diversity. I'd like to begin by sharing a very significant lesson that I learned connected to the Ford Motor Company when I was a child. In 1958, my father was one of the largest dealers of a particular model of Ford in all of Chicagoland. It was the Edsel. Some of you may have heard of the Edsel. Anyways, it was a good lesson. My father struggled a lot. He lost practically everything. And to this day, he still defends the Edsel. He says the problem was it was ahead of its time. And also he says that the American economy and the people were not open to new things because around the same time Russia put the Sputnik in outer space. And that really made us scared here in America. But anyways, as he was struggling, my bedroom was right next to the only bathroom in our house in Highland Park, Illinois. And I would hear him singing a song while in the shower every day. It was a song by Al Jolson. When April showers come your way, they bring the flowers that bloom in May. And I was thinking how special. He was saying what appeared to be a great crisis is an opportunity that could bring something very beautiful in life. Most of us do not like when it's storming rain. But factually, that storming rain is what? Waters the beautiful flowers that bloom in May. Some years ago, in Bombay, where I live, I was in an auditorium, something like this. There was about 350 students in a college for chartered and certified accountants. I was standing at this podium, I gave a talk, and then I had the courage to ask these students if there was any questions. I called on one man. He stood up, and everyone in the room, they made a sound. I understood that this person has a lot of charisma and he's very popular, and people hear what he says. He screamed at me like thunder. He said, "Your talk is completely misleading and useless. You are nothing but a cheater, and I reject everything that you say." People were really listening to him. He said, "What if everyone in the world became a Swami like you? Who would grow our food? Who would do our trading and banking? Who would educate our children? Who would run our governments? Therefore, everything you say is rejected and misleading." He got a standing ovation. There was a long standing ovation, and I was standing during the ovation. And I said a little prayer that I need some help on this one. So when finally everything settled down, I asked him a question. Dear sir, what if everyone in the world became an accountant like you? Who would grow our food? Who would do our banking and run our businesses? Who would run our governments? Who would educate our children? In fact, if everyone in the world became an accountant like you, there would be 100% unemployment because no one would need an accountant. The reality is, we need farmers, we need bankers, we need manufacturers, we need teachers, we need politicians, we need accountants, and there's also some need for swamis like me. Because the human body is very much like the social body. Health is not when we judge each other, one is better than another, but when we work together. Each part of the body has a very unique function, a unique shape, a unique color, and can do something that no other part of the body could do. The feet cannot do what the lungs do. The eyes cannot do what the heart does. The hands cannot do what the knees do. Yes? They have their own shape, their own color, and their own abilities. But all these different organs and parts of the body are working together for the welfare of the whole body. And when they work together in that way, we have a healthy body. Here at the Ford Motor Company, from what I used to learn in school back in Chicago, one of the great contributions was the development of the assembly line. Yes, that Henry Ford really perfected. And the assembly line is where each particular person is contributing a particular specified contribution to the building of the whole car, the Ford. And because it was done so expertly, and everyone was working together for the sake of the whole car, according to their particular function, it became one of the greatest cars of history. It was foundational for the future of the world. Unity in diversity. To actually see that unity. In a garland of flowers, there may be many colors, many shapes, many fragrances, many textures. But when they're weaved together in a flower, it's something very, very beautiful. And from a spiritual perspective, I heard a particular verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which to me was such an essential, universal principle to spiritualize this concept of unity and diversity. The Sanskrit is Vidyavanaya Sampane Brahmani Gavihastini Sunicho Chaiva Swapake Cha Pandita Samadarshan. What is real knowledge or wisdom? According to the Gita, real wisdom is not simply about how much data we can store in our brains. It's not about necessarily who we are, or what we have, or what we can do. It's about our values. It's about our vision. Real wisdom, this verse tells, is the ability to see everyone with equal vision. Whether one is black or white or red or yellow or brown, male or female, whether one is a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or a Jain or a Sikh or a Parsi or a Zoroastrian or an agnostic or an atheist, whether one is a human or an elephant or a cow or a dog or a cat, to see the sacredness of life and to honor and respect the sacredness of life. Mamayavam so jiva loke jiva bhutasana. This means that wherever there is life, the source of consciousness, that is a sacred part of God. And this is a universal principle. In the Bible, the first commandment is to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And what is the expression of that experience? That we love our neighbor as ourselves. And everyone is our neighbor from a spiritual perspective. The whole world is our family if we look deeper beneath the external differences. And when we actually see that essential core of what we really all have in common as life, as consciousness, as spirit, then all the diversity that we have among us can be utilized for everyone's benefit, for real happiness, for enlightenment. And that education is so crucial in the world today, both in the simple farms and in the major corporations, where people are actually seeking the essence. The tendency is to become possessed by our possessions. Even though I may not have many possessions, it's not an impediment to be a millionaire or a billionaire. What is critical is that what we have, however little or of however much, we utilize it for a useful purpose. Just a couple months ago, I was invited to speak at the HSBC Bank at its international headquarters in Canary Wharf in London. And there was 850 bankers that attended my talk. And I began my talk trying to make a connection. I said, I'm very honored and grateful to be here among many of the greatest bankers in the world and one of the greatest banks in the world. And you asked me to speak to you. And the reality is that I haven't had a bank account or signed a check since 1969. So little swamis like me could use what we have, and big corporate heads could use what we have. Things in themselves are neutral. The value of anything is the character of the person who's holding that thing. An example, a knife. A thief will use it to kill someone, to steal. And a surgeon will take the same knife and use it to save a man's life or a woman's life. Is the knife good or bad? The knife is as good or bad as the person who holds it. So everything in this world potentially is spiritual. Everything in this world potentially could be used not only for one's own enlightenment, but for the enlightenment of the society around us. By serving others, we work on ourselves. And we should work on ourselves so that we could better serve others. This idea of seva, or unselfish service, is the very core of human culture. To be able to actually respect other people for who they are and what they are in a spirit of service is the foundation of culture. It always has been and it always will be. And perhaps it is the greatest need in the world today. Human evolution is growing from the need to take to the joy of giving. To live, to give. And we acquire for that purpose. Helen Keller, she wrote that the most beautiful things in this world are not things that you can touch with your fingers or see with your eyes, but those things that you can feel with your heart. Recently, I was invited to speak for 3 days at the Mike Milken Institute Global Conference in California. And I gave a morning meditation every day and spoke. And I went to a few panels, and there was many beautiful things that I discovered there. There was one speaker who was in a panel you may have heard of. Because I live in Bombay, it was the first time I heard of him, believe it or not. His name is Joe Torre. Have you heard of him? He was a Hall of Fame baseball player, and he was the manager of the New York Yankees. Now you may be wondering, what is a Swami talking about the New York Yankees? I'll try to justify it as I go on with my speech. Joe Torre, he came to the Yankees at a time when, for 11 years, they were not in a single World Series playoff. After he became the manager, in the next 10 years, they were in 6 World Series and won 4 World Series. And he's considered by the Baseball Association to one of the 5 greatest, most successful managers in the history of baseball. He was asked, what do you feel your greatest accomplishment is in your life? And he said, it's not about being in the Hall of Fame. It's not about winning World Series. That was good. But I believe the greatest accomplishment in life is this. He began to tell about his past. He said, when I was young in New York, I was brought up in an abusive, domestically violent home. And I suffered miserably. And the only way I found in my life to hide from the sufferings of my life was to play baseball. I took everything out in my baseball playing, and I became a great baseball player. And I entered the Hall of Fame, and I led the Yankees to World Series, and I transformed the Dodgers and the Cardinals. He said, but the accomplishment that is most fulfilling to my heart is I started an organization to help children who are subjected to domestic violence. And I teach them how to deal with the same things I suffer with. And I give them encouragement, appreciation, and love. And I see how it transforms their lives. That's the most important thing I ever did. When I was listening to that, I was thinking, even from a purely secular perspective, there is no greater satisfaction than being an instrument of compassion within this world. Whoever we are, wherever we are. From a spiritual perspective, or let us say from a more religious perspective, I believe he's a spiritual person. Years ago, I was in the ghettos of Calcutta, and I met with Mother Teresa. And she told me something I never forgot. She said, the greatest problem in this world is hunger. Not hunger of the stomach, hunger of the heart. People are lonely. She told me, I travel throughout the world, and I'm in New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Bombay. She said, I meet some of the most successful, prosperous people in the world. And when I look in their eyes, I see that they're starving. Their hearts are starving. The only thing that can satisfy the hunger of the heart is love. And the origin of that need is our natural love for God. And when we connect to that love, then we can see every living being in connection and learn to respect and honor everyone, and to find the joy of serving. In 1971, I was in a holy village in India, and I first met my beloved spiritual teacher, Srila Prabhupada. And by this time, I had learned something about him. When he was 70 years old, he left a little holy village, and somebody gave him a free ticket on a cargo ship from Calcutta to New York. It was a 30-day voyage. On it, he had 2 heart attacks, seasickness, soon to have a stroke. He didn't come to America to get anything. He simply wanted to share this universal principle of accessing that compassion, that love that is within all of us. He was asked, why have you come? We have our own religions. He said, I've not come to convert. I've simply come to enlighten to that universal essential principle that there is love dormant within all of our hearts. He explained that the true person we are and others are, the source of consciousness is the Spirit. I'm seeing through my eyes, tasting through my tongue, hearing through my ears, touching through my flesh, thinking through my brain, loving through my heart. But who am I? Since I'm here at the illustrious Ford Motor Company, I'd like to use an analogy of a car. When you go in a car, you're seeing through the windshield, you're turning right or left, you're honking the horn, and it's necessary to take good care of your car, to give it fuel, to give it oil, to give it tune-ups. But the needs of the driver are different than the needs of the car. The difference between a living body and a dead body, from a spiritual perspective, is the difference between a car with a driver and a car without a driver. Consciousness. So he just came to give this universal message. He didn't know anyone. He had nothing. He had no money. But within a few years, he had tens and thousands of followers and hundreds of temples and ashrams and millions of books. And I was sitting with him, and someone asked him, "Are you the guru for the world?" And he looked down with such natural humility in his face. He looked on the ground and he said, "I am just the servant of everyone. That's all." That impacted my heart. To serve is the most beautiful thing there is, because to serve others is an expression of love when it is without selfish motivations. Recently I gave a lecture at Princeton University. The lecture was entitled East Meets West: God, Love, and Spiritual Activism from a Christian and Hindu perspective. And representing the West was Dr. Cornel West. Have any of you ever heard of him? He's a very profoundly brilliant professor at Princeton, author of books. And representing the East was me. And during that talk, and we just bound like brothers. It was incredible. Even though there are so many differences between us. I mean, his hairstyle's like this. Mine's like this. He was wearing a nice suit, and I'm wearing these robes. And he's a Baptist, Christian, devout as anything. And I'm coming from an Indian Hindu type tradition of bhakti or devotion. And he's been married a few times, and I'm a celibate monk. But somehow or other we found something in common that we shared that was so sweet and so deep. We just bonded like brothers. He took me to his office and said, "I want to introduce you to my mother." And he called his mother, and I talked to his mother. And I said, "Since my mother's left this world, you're just like my own mother." And she said, "Yes, son, you are my son, and I am your mother." And Cornell held my hand and said, "That means we're really brothers." And then we went out and gave this talk together in front of about 800 students. And he said something that really moved me. He said, "The true essence of all religion, of all humanity, is to love and be an instrument of love. But unfortunately, here in America and all over the world, we're being so much conquered by weapons of mass distraction. What we really want, what Mother Teresa was talking about, that love within the heart that we're actually hungry for, we have a tendency to become so distracted by things. Things could give pleasure to the mind, things could give pleasure to the body, but things cannot give pleasure to the heart. We need to love. We need to be loved. And so many times we become so distracted by the pressures and the stresses of this world that our life becomes really very shallow and superficial. Like a little girl, the parents work so hard and decorate her with beautiful clothes and nice ornaments, and she's pretty, but inside she's just starving for love and attention. Human society is very much like that. To focus on that is so important. To find unity in the diversity of our own life, it begins there. We have our economic responsibilities, we have our domestic responsibilities, we have our occupational responsibilities, we have our social responsibilities, but we also have our spiritual responsibilities. To find unity within that diversity by balancing. The word yoga means to harmonize, to unify the body, the mind, and the self. And in doing so, to harmonize our relationship with nature through respect and honor, and with all other living beings, all of humanity, wherever there's life. And this brings the highest fulfillment to life. And it brings meaning to whatever we do. If we have a strong foundation, we can build something wonderful on that foundation. It's like this fantastic building we're sitting in. People may say, this is a wonderful auditorium. Nice carpet, very good architecture, beautiful lighting, nice sound system. But how many of you are thinking, this place has an incredible foundation? Foundation may not be seen, but it's holding up everything. Our values, our character, our fulfillment can only really be substantial in whatever we do, in every aspect of our life, if we have a strong foundation. And all the spiritual practices are meant for that purpose, to give us a strong foundation. When the storms come, if we build a house on sand, it's going to crush down. Build a house on solid rock, it will withstand all these storms. Integrity. Integrity is to maintain our values, our character, and our ideals, even in the face of temptation, or even in the face of fear. And understanding that those values will bring maintaining those values will bring deeper fulfillment than anything else. So when I was in that auditorium and I gave this type of answer to that accountant student, that instead of judging each other, why don't we actually learn to appreciate and encourage one another, despite our differences, and serve together for a higher purpose and create harmony. And I'm shy to tell you this, but I got a bigger standing ovation than he went like this. It really is a joy to be with you here. And when I told my father I was coming to Ford Motor Company to give a talk, he cried. And he said, make sure you tell them about the Edsel. One of the great-grandson of Henry Ford is a dear friend of mine, Alfred Brush Ford. He lives in Gatesville, Florida. We were very, very dear friends. And I remember he wrote a beautiful letter to my father talking about our friendship. And he ended the letter with a P.S. Thanks for selling all those Edsels. I thank you very, very much.
how you chose India to be your destination?
That's a long answer. To be honest with you, sir, in trying to answer that question, I wrote this book called The Truth. But to give a little summary to a 360-page book, I was raised in the 1960s as a teenager. How many of you were around at that time? Ladies don't have to raise their hands. Another thing I learned from my father is a couple years ago, he had a cataract removed from his eye. And there's one lady who's a very good friend of his, and she saw him a couple days later, and he said, "You look so old. What happened to you? What happened to you? I just saw you a few days ago." She was, "What do you mean?" "I'm fine." He said, "Oh, I understand. My cataract's removed, so now I'm seeing you for what you really look like." I didn't see all your wrinkles. So she was very unhappy with that. But anyways, I was born in 1950. And the 1960s in America was a very turbulent time. The Vietnam War was raging. And it was a war that many young people didn't believe in. But our belief was not really considered, because when you turned 18, if you were male, you were subject to be drafted, where you had two choices: go to war or go to jail. If it was a war we believed in, we would stand behind it. And I saw my friends, their elder brothers. Some were coming back in caskets. Some were coming back drug addicts and wounded due to the stress. And at the same time, I had a job after school because of the Edsel situation. When I grew a little older, to help my parents, I had a job after school in Highland Park, Illinois. And almost everybody I was working with was African Americans from the south side of Chicago. And in those days, if you're born in the ghetto, it's almost for sure you're going to live and die in the ghetto. There was no way out. And I saw how they were good people, but they were so downtrodden, so much objects of prejudice. They were all alcoholics, just to deal with it. And every day in school, we do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, which was mandatory in those days. And which I really believed in the principles of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. But it's about everyone being free. And I just didn't see freedom. I did. If you had a certain color skin, a certain religion, then you were free. But it didn't make sense. I joined the Civil Rights Movement and was stoned. I was the object of stones and bottles from my white brothers and sisters. In 1968, in the Democratic Convention, I was in Grant Park, Chicago, just trying to ask questions to understand what's happening in this world. And the Chicago police, they attacked me with tear gas and shields and clubs. And I was told that they were protecting my freedom. I had many questions. And I joined the counterculture, where it was a sign of discontent with the way the world was going by growing your hair long for boys. But as I was in that arena, I realized that what we were fighting against, we were the same thing, just in a different fashion. We're fighting against hate, but we hate the people we hate. We hate people who hate. And then I remember hearing, I believe it was from Martin Luther King, that the irony of our times is we have guided missiles but misguided people. And that we should have an ideal that we're willing to live and die for. Otherwise, we don't really have something very meaningful to live for. Gandhi's words echoed in my heart. Be the change you want to see in the world. So gradually it turned me more to a spiritual search in my life. If I don't change myself, I'm not really going to do something very substantial in changing the world. But I was born and raised in a Jewish family, and in those days, there were people who hated me because of my religion. And I write about this in the book. When I was only 7 years old, I was confronted with such hatred. I was told even God hated me. And it just didn't make sense. In the name of a loving God, why is there so much hatred? And as I grew up and became a teenager, I came to the conclusion either I have to reject religion altogether because it's creating such disunity and hatred between people, or there must be something very beautiful at the essence, at the core of all these religions that are meant to unify people. And I believed in that. So I went deeper into Judaism, and I studied Christianity. And myself and my friend Gary, who I grew up with, we decided to go on a summer trip, when we were teenagers, 19, to Europe, to see other people's cultures, to see how other people see the world, each other, America, God. It was an exploration. And I promised my mother and father I'd be back in 2.5 months for college. In Europe, it's a long story, but I went so deep into my searching of trying to find real meaning, fulfillment, and purpose to life. I was spending my days in museums trying to get symbolic messages from the art of the world, and I was going to synagogues and cathedrals and monasteries, and I was going to riverbanks and forests, and ultimately I was in a cave in a Greek island, crying and praying for direction. And I heard a voice from within. Go to India. I had never met an Indian. I never ate Indian food. Not even a samosa. I had lots of pizza. And I went back to the cave and I told Gary, it's an interesting story. I said to Gary, something amazing happened to me at sunset. And Gary said, something amazing happened to me. I said, what? He said, I heard a voice. I said, what did he say? Gary said, you will not believe me. I said, I might believe you. Gary said, I don't think you'll believe me. I said, just tell me. We're sitting together on the stone floor of a cave, looking out over the Mediterranean Sea into the stars. He said, I heard a voice that told me, go to Israel. I said, where? He said, I told you you wouldn't believe me. I said, no, I believe you. I just didn't hear you. Where? He said, Israel. We should go to Israel. I said, well, he told me to go to India. So at sunrise the next morning, I left Gary and I hitchhiked to India from the Middle East, through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. I had no money. I studied Islam. And when I arrived in India, I traveled and searching for that inner fulfillment that I believe we're all looking for. And a few years ago, I was in Pennsylvania, where my very dearest friend was dying of cancer. He was in his last stage. He asked me to stay with him. He said, I want to die in your arms. We were together for 8 weeks. He was an African-American man from Cleveland, not far away. Born in 1950 also. But by the goodness of his heart, his love for people, and his incredible determination, he got a full scholarship from Princeton, graduated, was a civil rights leader in the 60s, and became a Swami like me, in the same tradition. And as a Swami, Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, Alice Coltrane, among tens and thousands of others, took spiritual counseling from him. While I was at his bedside one day, he said, you should write a book about your travels. And I said, I'm not going to write a book. He said, why? I said, I feel it's an act of arrogance to write a book about me. Just, I did this, I did this, I did this. And besides that, if I tell the story, no one will believe it if I tell it in truth. And he looked up at me from his bed. I was sitting at his side. He said, your story as a young boy searching for truth is really the story of all of us. You did it in your way, but we're all searching for inner fulfillment and truth in one way or another. And if your story can help give hope and guidance to others, then if you don't write it, that is an act of arrogance. Promise me on my deathbed that you will write this book. I made the promise. A few days later, I changed my mind. And was trying to decide how I'm going to convince him to release me of my promise. But in between, he passed away. So I wrote the book, and it's called The Journey Home. I believe home is within the heart of every living being. It's where we find our true mother and father, and we find the true unity in all the diversity among each other as children of that same source. It's that home where we can actually learn